Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christi Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate? Hello, Simon. Thank you for joining me today. This is going to be a pleasure. The near-death experience is something that I am so interested in. And of course, you wrote this book, Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife. With so many near-death experience books out there, why did you want to create this one?
Well, as a podcaster, I interview a lot of people who've had near-death experiences. I've done over 350 interview episodes. And in that, when I have a guest on my podcast, I read their book. And so many people of near-death experiences have written a book, and there's people who write books about near-death experiences. But the one thing I haven't found is a book that focuses on these verifiable events. They're called veridical. So, I mean, there is one other book that was 2007. So mine is the first book since 2007 to focus on these verifiable events, things that people see while they're out of body that are later verified. And people could say to them, but you were dead. There's no way you could have seen that. Your brain was flatlined. So it's that kind of verification is the basis of the book.
Like, what types of things are verifiable? What would you consider something that's verified?
Well, it's just like the first case in the book. Each chapter in the book is focused on a different NDE. So within the chapter, I describe the entire near-death experience, not just the verification event. But the first one is Barbara Bartolome. She was on an operating table. And what happened was they were going to inject some dye into her spine up here because she had a spinal injury. And then she was on this table, and then they do this. And as it tipped up, the dye would go down her spine. And they had, like this kind of radio X-ray view of her spine. And they could see where the dye was leaking out of it. So they knew where to operate, where the problems were. But the guy operating the table was also looking the other way at a monitor to see this X-ray view of her spine, and he tipped it the wrong way. So the dye, she went head down, and the dye went down into her brain, and that's what basically killed her. Her heart stopped and her brain flatlined. And the thing is, because she was in an operating theatre, she was rigged up to these boxes, so they knew for sure that clinically she was dead. And as I talked to Dr. Eben Alexander, who was a professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. And he said to me, with about 20 seconds of your heart stopping, your brain will flatline. And at that point, it's impossible for your brain to make and retain complex memories. So Barbara has this viewpoint from the ceiling. She's looking down on the operating theatre, and then they all spring into action. Like, we've got to resuscitate. So the nurse gets on the phone and calls for a defibrillator unit because there wasn't one in there. And another man came running in with a box, and he put all these, those sort of sticky pads with wires on them on her chest. And then the two X-ray guys were doing resuscitation, 2 minutes each with the chest compressions. There were two surgeons in there who were observing it because they were going to do the spinal operation, an orthopedic surgeon and a neurosurgeon. So she saw all these different people doing all these different things while looking down from the ceiling. And so when she was resuscitated and stabilized, she said, that was amazing. What just happened? I saw you do this, and you called the defibrillator, and you two guys were taking it in turns for the CPR. And the doctor came over and did this. And the way her heart started is the surgeon pushed the man out of the way, and he thumped her in the chest. And she said he brought his hand from back here and he hit her in the chest. And it was on the second one, it sort of got her heart beating. And so she was pulled back into her body. And she said they were all speechless. They were dumbfounded because they knew from their equipment she was clinically dead, but she described every little thing that they all did while she was dead. And the neurosurgeon was such a skeptic, and she was explaining it, and he stood next to her, and she said he clenched his fists and he clenched his teeth. He said, "I'm not going to stand here and listen to any of this nonsense," and he stormed out of the room. But then the orthopedic surgeon sat down and said, "Okay, tell me again, what did you see?" So that's one sort of thing you could call is a verification event, because the equipment showed she was clinically dead, so they could be sure of that. They could be sure that the things that they did happened while she was clinically dead, when it was impossible for her to have any consciousness at all. The other chapters in the book, it goes further than that. So people will see something that happens in the waiting room down the hall from where they are in the hospital. Or they'll see something that happens. There's one lady who goes home, her body's dead in the hospital, and she sees her children packing clothes for her to bring to the hospital. There's somebody else who sees their family at home. So I think this person's in a coma, and she could see her mum cooking dinner and her brother and sister playing in their different rooms, and the father's doing something. And later she said, "I saw all this." And the family all confirmed that she was correct at everything she saw. Because there is a skeptical criticism, say, like Barbara's case, where she was in the operating theatre and everything happened where her body was. There's a skeptical viewpoint that could say, well, maybe she had some form of consciousness. Maybe she could hear things. She hallucinated. She kind of joined the dots and could. But if somebody's describing what's in a room 100 meters away, or an apartment that's 7 kilometers away, you can't explain that. So this is the side of near-death experience that fascinates me the most, this verification stuff.
Right. And these things are verifiable through a variety of people, a variety of sources. What's fascinating to me is I always think of when we have a near death experience, we stay close to the body in a way, but then some of these people being able to go kilometers away, going down the hall, going to these various places during their near death experience. I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason to that, why some would be able to go further and not. What do you think?
It seems to be thought. They think of something and then they can be there. With this guy, I'll tell you about this woman. She came out of her body and she's in the hospital room, and she thought about her family in the waiting room. And then she just suddenly went through the wall, down the hallway, and into the waiting room. So it was the thought of being with her family that carried her there. And that's why she got into the waiting room. And there's another guy who saw his girlfriend talking to his aunt, and they were having this deep conversation about something. And he saw all that happening, and he described the waiting room later to the girlfriend, because the girlfriend months later was saying, "Yeah, I was talking to your aunt about this and that." He goes, "Yeah, I remember that conversation. I was there." And she's like, "No, you weren't. You were in the hospital room." And he said, "No, they turned the lights out on half of the waiting room, 3 o'clock in the morning, and you were having this conversation." And then he suddenly realized, "You're right. I was in a coma at that time." And that's when he realized he'd had a near-death experience. He hadn't worked it out before, but they'd turn half the lights off in the waiting room because his aunt was quite elderly and it was too bright for her, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And so he could describe the furniture and this conversation exactly.
Isn't that amazing? People die every day. People die every day. And, some people are resuscitated and don't have a describable near death experience, verifiable or otherwise. Why do you think some have this near death experience and some don't?
That's one of the big questions. And
Right?
it's only 10 to 15% of people who have a near-death experience. Like
Oh,
if they've
that's
after,
you.
after they've had that kind of thing where they may have died and been resuscitated. One of my ideas is that perhaps they didn't have one because they didn't need one. Near-death experiences can be so impactful and emotional, and people come back from them changed fundamentally for the rest of their lives. And I wonder if sometimes there are people who need that from a spiritual point of view, almost like their spirit guides are looking down on them and they're thinking, "Oh man, what are they doing with their life?" and they have an accident, and the spirit's like, quick, grab them, let's give them a near-death experience. We'll give them a spiritual kick up the pants and we'll get them back on track. But then there's lots of people who just don't need that. And so they don't get a near-death experience. But, it's like there's somebody in my book, he remembers his near-death experience 15 years later. So maybe a lot more people have them, but they just don't remember. And also there's that thing, people are too scared to talk about it because they don't want people to think they're crazy. So I don't think we can be exactly sure of these percentages.
Right. So you said that some people need this near death experience. Why would they need it?
It might be the way they're living their life. There's a percentage, 70% of people who have a near-death experience get divorced afterwards.
Wow.
Maybe they came into this life with a plan to be doing something and they went off the plan. So they might be married, they might have a really great job, a great career, a huge house, a great car, fantastic holidays. And then they come back and they realize that none of that's important. It's about relationships with people and how you treat people. And we've got to look after the environment and be more loving and just help people out around us, be part of the community. And you can imagine if their partner is saying, hang on a second, I like the money, I like the big house. So it might be that kind of thing that they're just completely off path and they need to be brought back to what they came here for.
Isn't that amazing? The people that I've talked to who've had these near death experiences, Dr. Eben Alexander is one of the others that I've had on this show, but many experiencers that I've talked to, they come back fundamentally changed, not just kinder, more empathetic, more aware of themselves and their surroundings, but also with new talents and gifts, right? Have you found that in your research as well?
Yeah, they found people come back with certain side effects. They become psychic, or if they were psychic beforehand, when they come back, they're even more psychic, like supercharged. And then they have amazing synchronicities show up in their lives. And some people can't wear watches because they keep breaking down. But then there's also, I've talked to a couple of people who became very artistic. And one guy became a painter and he hadn't painted before. And there's David Ditchfield. I don't know if you've
Oh,
talked to
yes,
him.
I
He,
have. Yes,
he
on
wrote a
both of my
symphony, didn't
shows.
he?
He did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, he came out painting as well, wrote a symphony. Right. And then Susan Walter, who has been on both of my podcasts as well, had a near death experience, and her angels told her that she needed to paint them. And now she is a visionary award winning artist who does angel portraits. So it's amazing what we can gain out of this. And I know that part of this whole phenomenon, if you will, is also the life review. Can you talk a bit about that and what the benefits are of this life review?
I don't know if benefits might be the word sometimes because it seems so emotional and has such an impact on people. And it can be quite, I don't know if you say harrowing or distressing in places. But I think in my book, there may be 10 or 12 people who have a life review during their near-death experience. And I tried to go into detail and explaining how it all happens. But there's people experience this in different ways, don't they? I talked to somebody who saw it as a hologram on a table in an office. And then there was somebody who said that it's like they were standing in a sphere and they were just surrounded by all their memories. And somebody else said it was in a big box and they could look in and pull out these different memories in this huge box. But it's that thing, isn't it, where you have the life review and it's almost like every second of your life you relive it, but you see how you affect people and you see it from that other person's point of view. So if you were mean to them, you get to feel how they felt, how bad they felt when you were mean to them. And that's where the impact can come from and the emotion. And if you live 50 years and you haven't been a great kind of person, then those life experiences, those life reviews can last a second. Some people say they're over in an instant, but at the same time, they experience every second of their life. That's the weird thing about time in the afterlife, isn't it?
Mm.
But if you're 50 years and you've been a mean person, that's really going to affect you. You'll feel all that hurt you've caused. But then at the same time, when you're nice to people, you feel how they felt when you were nice to them. And I found that sometimes people will be going through their life review with their spirit guides and nobody's judging them. of all these bad things they've done. It's just you judge yourself and you feel that pain, and your spirit guides might be with you and they'll be have their arm around you, they're backing you up, they're looking after you. Well, somebody said to me they noticed that when they did something nice, and it could be something really small, something you forget about within minutes, even, the spirit guides were so happy with you just for the smallest little things when you're being nice to someone. So I think that's why some people change so much when they have the near death experience. As a life review is the big thing there.
It's a huge thing. We need to talk about hypnosis as well, because we both do that. And in some of my sessions, people will go through their life review and from whatever lifetime that they just experienced, and they'll describe it in many similar terms, as it's like a projector on a screen, or it's a valley and all of the scenes of their life are laid out across the valley. Many, many different things. It's an important part of each lifetime that we evaluate, maybe not evaluate, but we review everything that's happened, all of our thoughts, words, and deeds as are kept in the Akashic records, and how they affect people. That's so important. So yeah, you do regression hypnosis as well. Tell us a bit about that. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to ask you a few simple favors. First of all, please rate, review, and share this podcast wherever you're listening. It sounds like a simple little thing, and it is, but it has a huge impact for us because it helps other people find us in the podcasting algorithms. I don't know how it works, but I do know that it helps a lot. Next, if you would subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, whether that's YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you're listening, just hit subscribe or follow, and that helps you and it helps us. It helps you because then you receive notifications when we have a new episode that's out. It helps us because, again, algorithm magic, I don't know what happens, but it helps. And then finally, you can support our podcast in a tangible way by going to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast and then click on support the show. Now, we have a new feature too. We are now on Patreon. You can find us on Patreon. You can also find the link to Patreon when you go to radiatewellnesscommunity.com/podcast. So on Patreon, for $3 a month or $5 a month, you can support your metaphysical and spiritual growth. You can learn about upcoming guests, and you can get early and ad-free versions of the shows. So please support us. This podcast is free for you to listen, but we have costs, and quite frankly, they come out of my pocket. So if you like this content, if you get a lot out of it, please see what you can do to give back. Thank you so much.
I was taken through my first past life regression in about 1987. I used to go to the College of Psychic Studies, and that's in London. And it was set up by the Society for Psychical Research, maybe 140 years ago. And it was a thing where you could get trained in mediumship there and psychic stuff and channeling and past life regression. So what I would do, I'd go every couple of weeks and you pay a little bit of money and all the students could practice on you, their mediumship or whatever it is they're training in. So it was like I was an investigator going there every couple of weeks, all these different people getting all these different experiences. But when I did the past life regression, I went straight into it, straight into this past life. And it was like, I don't know how to describe it. Sometimes I have clients who don't get that deep into it, don't get that connection, that strong connection to a past life straight away. But I saw myself as a little girl in this park in London, and my parents were there. And I realized, oh boy, I'm talking too much. I realized the father in the past life there is my best friend in this life.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so this park was on a steep slope, and it was a really weird place to put a park. But 2 years later, I was in a part of London I'd never been to before, and there was the park exactly as I'd seen it in the regression. And the houses around were just the same as the houses I'd seen. But I saw in that life, I was a nurse in the First World War in France, and there were all these guys coming from the front line with these terrible injuries, and that's what I saw of that life. And it did have a big impact on me. And so in part of my investigations over the years, I'd do another past life regression, then another one. And eventually I wanted to do it myself, but I wanted to train properly. So I got a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy. And then I got a certificate in past life regression therapy. So I've been doing that for a few years now. I've done hundreds of sessions with people, and it's really amazing. It's like you don't never get bored of it. It's just you never know what's going to come up.
Oh, there's something new all the time. And we learn so much from it. So much from I do QHHT, quantum healing hypnosis technique. I'm a level 3 practitioner. I've been doing that since 2016. So 9 years and yeah, hundreds of sessions. It's fascinating work because it seems like every session you learn something new about the nature of life, the nature of death, the nature of consciousness, what is possible. And, in these verifiable past lives, I think are fascinating, where you actually go to the place that you recognized from that other lifetime and you can see it and verify it. And, I've had verifiable sessions, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, where we can actually look up and do a little bit of research and find some of the artifacts, find some of the places and people and events that are discussed in these regression sessions. Have you found any verifiable lifetimes?
Yeah, one of my clients sent me a picture of a portrait, an oil painting. He tracked down his past life and found that painting of who he was in that previous life, and he put that on my website. So I've had that one come back to me. And I interviewed a guy on my podcast called Robert Snow, and he went into a past life. This was early 90s, before the internet, and he was a detective. He was a tough guy, and he thought this past life regression stuff's a load of nonsense. And he set out to prove that it was nonsense, and in the end, he proved the past life was real. He said he found 28 proofs that he just can't deny it. So, past life regression does take you to genuine past lives.
Oh, absolutely. There was one where this gentleman was a leader in an indigenous tribe somewhere, South America, Central America, something like that. And after he passed in that lifetime, I asked, well, where's your body and what's happening with your body? And he says, oh, they're eating it. And I thought, well, now that's
Oh,
interesting. Why are they doing that? And he said, well, because they love me and they respect me. And so, sure enough, we Googled this afterward, and there are tribes that would eat their revered dead as a sign of respect and deep love for them. They wanted to internalize them within their own bodies, which is very interesting. And there are others where you can go and you can research, well, that sounds like an interesting way to live. And then you find out that this is exactly what other civilizations would do. Is very, very how did you get into all of this stuff in the first place?
I've always been interested. I think back, I can't really explain it. When I was 10 years old, I would get books from the library about ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs and all sorts of things. And then over time, I got more and more interested in just two specific things, which was this afterlife, or proof of an afterlife, and the other thing was UFOs. And I wasn't brought up to be religious. This area where I lived in London, in the whole neighborhood, none of my friends, when I was 7 years old or 12 years old, no one went to church. No one was Christian or in religious at all. And so that's where I'm an outsider. And I don't have that thing of faith in an afterlife or faith in God. It's for me, it's more, okay, where's the evidence? But it's been over time. I've read a lot of books. I've had my own experiences, and it's one thing. I wonder if we're all on a spiritual path, and when you have some kind of an experience, it's given you deliberately to move you the next step along the path. It's like I had this psychic flash, is what I call it, where I was going to visit a friend who was getting married in New Zealand. I'd never been to New Zealand before, and I was in London 2 weeks before, and I just had this flash in my mind of 30 seconds of time in New Zealand. And I saw the car we were in, the neighborhood we were in, the names of the roads, the streets that were driving through, what this conversation I was having with my friend. And then 2 weeks later, it happened exactly as I'd seen it. And one of my friends said to me, "Oh, that's deja vu." And I said, "It's not deja vu because, deja vu is like a second or something. You get an impression of it. But this was 30 seconds of this whole conversation. And I saw what the houses look in Christchurch in New Zealand. And they have to build them a certain way because there's earthquakes and what the colors of that were and the street names. So that was one of my experiences, and it really shows you that more to us than just flesh and blood, and the psychic things are real and afterlife stuff is real. And I've seen UFOs really close up a couple of times.
Have you now?
And yeah, so there's all sorts of things. It's all little steps along the path.
Right. It's like breadcrumbs, and it seems to be all connected from UFOs to Bigfoot, from afterlife to angels. It all seems to be part of this big, great big thing. So, can you tell us a bit about your UFO experiences? Sounds like they've been pretty profound.
Well, I was playing in a band, and this is the early 90s, and we finished a gig west of London, and it was about 1 a.m., and I'm on the motorway heading back towards London, and we drive on the left, and up ahead on the left there was a really bright light in this empty field, and I would use this motorway a lot. I knew that was an empty field, and I thought that's odd. I thought maybe there was emergency repair with electricity lines or something.
Right.
So I slowed down and I got to like 5 miles an hour, and I checked my mirrors. There's no other cars on the motorway, which seemed a bit weird. And just as I got to that point, there was this craft there, and it was about 25 feet off the ground, maybe 200 feet from me, the size of a large house, didn't move an inch the whole time, and it was completely silent. And one half of the bottom of it was covered in red lights. Coming from the other end of it was a really powerful beam of light pointed at the ground. And so I'm driving along in my car and I'm doing 5 miles an hour. And I'm kind of looking up at the windscreen at it. And so I got a really good look at it. It was so close. And there's like a mental checklist. You think, well, it's not a helicopter. It can't be an aeroplane because they can't hover. It's not a hot air balloon. And I just what it was. But it's almost that thing. You also can't say, "Oh, that's definitely an alien spaceship," because you don't really know that either. But it's hard to work out what it was and where it came from.
Oh, interesting, isn't it? And then who left first? Did you or
I
they?
did. Went out of view as I went past, and I increased my speed and went home. So, and I checked the clock well, because there's this missing time thing with UFOs,
Right.
and I didn't have any missing time.
Wow. Was it frightening for you?
No, it wasn't really. It was very interesting. And I've been reading books on UFOs for years and I was fascinated by it. So I do find it a little weird that I just accelerated and left the space. I've heard of this happening to other people, this sort of thing.
Oh, really? Kind of like there's nothing to see here. You need to move along.
Yeah, there was a lady for a UFO. She parked her car and she had a really fancy camera on the back seat. And she leant backwards to pick up the camera and then she just stopped and forgot about it. And it was only later she thought, well, that was weird. Why didn't I take a picture? It was like they telepathically switched that off. And it's like telepathically they'd switch something off in me. So I'd accelerate and leave.
That funny. Like to stay and get out of the car and see if I can go meet them and introduce myself. But probably not. I'm sure that if that was their intention, have you actually meet them and see them and learn more about what they were doing, they would have allowed that, but they didn't. Very fascinating. And now you've taken all of these experiences, the past life regression, the UFOs, and you've turned it really into your mission. And you've got two podcasts. Can you tell us about your
Yeah.
podcasts?
Yeah, there's Our Paranormal Afterlife, which is this thing of looking for evidence of an afterlife. So, as well as talking to near-death experiences, I talk to people who research children with past life memories, people who do past life regression, mediums, deathbed visions, all these different kind of things. And yeah, so that's 350 interview episodes. But I also do another episode because I read the person's book. They're on my podcast. And so I do the hour-long interview and then I do a 10-minute read, an extract from their book, which can be really interesting.
Oh, that's
And with the
beautiful.
UFO podcast, I do the same thing. So that's about 175 interviews. And that also has this kind of bonus 10-minute episode as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. I wish I had time to read everybody's book who's on my podcast, but it's so hard to keep up with all of the reading. I commend you for doing that. And that sounds like a wonderful format. Why did you decide to bring all of this out in a podcast and go public with this information?
I do podcasting for a living now. It's with the hypnotherapy and the podcasting. And I had a job. I was working in IT, and it was an hour and 15 to get there, an hour and 15 to get back. So it's 2.5 hours a day I was in the car, and I'd listen to all these podcasts about all this stuff. And after a while, I thought, I've got the recording software. I'm a musician. I know how to record. Why don't I know about all this stuff? Maybe I could start interviewing people. Maybe I could do it. And I just kind of set my mind to it. It was weird, and in a way that as soon as I started sending emails out to people saying, "Will you be on my podcast?" they'd say yes. And it wasn't like they're saying, "Well, how many downloads have you got? You've only got 100." They'd still do it. So I've had some really amazing people on the podcast.
Yeah, you certainly have. You've had many folks that I've had, Dr. Raymond Moody, Evan Alexander, and others that names I recognized. It's great to just know that our circle is so small and that all of us in this sphere can know each other and network and learn from each other, I think is beautiful. Just I was talking with somebody about this just yesterday about how we're all forming a grid. And we've, you there in the UK, me here in the middle of the United States, but so many of us spread around the world, just creating this grid of light and anchoring the energy here. I think it's wonderful. So what do you
Yeah.
that people get out of all of the work that you do? The book on verifiable near death experience and your podcast. What do you want people to know from it?
Well, it's the kind of thing. One of the main reasons I started the podcast is because I was gathering all this amazing information. And I was almost like thinking that more people should know about this. And over time, I've had emails from people who perhaps they're grieving, they've lost somebody, and they were never interested in this stuff. And then they find these podcasts and they email me and say, you've really helped me with my grief, finding this information on near-death experiences. Or there are people who have very real fear of death. And I think these people will have this fear, but you don't really know about it. They're around us, but they won't talk to you about it. But they've emailed me and said, it keeps me awake all night, every night. I'm so scared of dying. And I heard your podcast and I feel so much better now. And they've started reading books and looking for other podcasts. So that's one of the reasons I know it at the time, I suppose, that I thought more people should know this stuff. There really is evidence that there is an afterlife and that we're not annihilated when we die.
But we're not. Not having a belief in afterlife, that is just as valid as having this belief in the afterlife. But I think it gives so many people comfort that our consciousness does not die. Simon, I loved your story about the woman who she was thinking of her family and went to go see them. And I feel like that's very typical of our loved ones on the other side. When we think of them, they come around and we can bring them closer that way too by thinking about them because their consciousness does not die.
And
Interesting.
there are those kind of apparitions, aren't there? Somebody will wake up at night and somebody will be at the foot of their bed and they don't know that they're dead. And then later they find out, oh, they died at that time you saw them in your bedroom was when they died. It was like they were coming to say goodbye or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happens quite often that our loved ones truly are just a thought away. Thinking about them brings them so much closer. Also, that you said that this person had just thought it and then they were there. And that happens all the time in hypnosis sessions. I'll ask people, especially when they're on type what we would think of as a future timeline on another planet or in space or in another dimension, that I'll say, well, how do you get in? And they'll say, well, I just think it and then I'm there. So just further proof and verification that consciousness really does work and consciousness what calls the shots. So fascinating.
I was just going to say that I had a woman on my podcast who described the NDE as the blink environment. She said you blink and then you be there. And somebody else told me they called it the fog stage because it was suddenly a fog and then they were in the next location. And there's another guy who said he felt a vibration throughout his body and then he was in the next location. But they just had to think of where they wanted to be and that would happen.
And it would have, but in a variety of ways. That's so interesting. I wonder why that would be. I mean, one would think that these laws of metaphysics would be across people and across, consciousness, but apparently it's not consistent. I wonder why that is. What do you think?
I think it seems that everybody who has a near-death experience, it's tailored exactly for them. It gives them exactly what they need.
Mhm.
And it's almost what I would call the theatre of the near-death experience, and the location they go to, and whether or not they have a life review, and who they might meet. Because, some people say they meet Jesus, and there may be atheists who meet Jesus and Christians who don't meet Jesus. And then there'll be like a Christian who will meet Buddha, one of the Hindu gods. So it's like they're getting given exactly what they need to move them forwards in life in the way that they should be or need to move forwards. And there's all these tiny little things that come up like that are different for different people. Like they talk about the tunnel experience, the tunnel of light when you die, but
Right.
not everybody has that experience. Lots of people do not have the tunnel of light in a near-death experience. And when they do have the tunnel experience, it can be different for different people. I've heard it described in all sorts of ways.
And that is fascinating to me too. Again, one might think that this type of visions, these types are more universal, and in a way they are, but they all have such different details and almost tailored to the person. I remember when my grandmother was dying, she was very fearful in her life. She was agoraphobic, and she just very anxious and fearful in her death experience. It wasn't a near death experience that I'm aware of, but in her death experience, she saw things that were frightening and did fill her with fear. But I think that for her, just facing all of these fears that she had, perhaps. But then my grandfather, who was pretty absent for much of my remembrance because he was always at the bar with
Yeah.
his friends, and but when he had his death experience, it was beautiful and peaceful. And I just think we, in a too, we might what we expect or what we've always experienced. So very interesting.
Yeah. And they talk about frequency as well, or your mind state. And when you die, you'll go to the place that matches your frequency. So if you've got a lower frequency, you'll go to a place that's a bit lower. And maybe that happens in death experiences as well.
Right. Yeah. All right. Right. So it's matches your frequency, what you expect. Now, has anyone in your research gone to a negative place, like
Oh,
what we would
yeah.
consider hell?
Yeah. Howard Storm. I don't know if you've talked to him.
I've
He
not.
had a very distressing experience. He was an art professor and he brought students over to Europe to go around these amazing galleries. And while he was in Paris, he had this terrible stomach pain. I found out later that his stomach had ruptured and the stomach acid was leaking into his abdomen. And he nearly died, but he was in his hospital bed feeling so bad. And then an instant later, he was standing next to it feeling great. And there were all these people in the hallway saying, "Come on, Howard, it's time to go." And he thought, it's time for my operation. So he went and met with this small group of people in the hallway and they started leading him down it. And he thought, this is strange. This hallway's a lot longer than I thought it would be. I didn't think this hospital was this big. And as they were going down the hallway, it got darker and darker. And he got to a point, he says, I'm going to go back. This isn't right. And at that point, they got really aggressive with this foul language and pushing him and taking him down this hall. And they got to this space eventually that was complete darkness. He couldn't see a thing. And that's where they attacked him. And they beat him so bad that he was like lying on the floor and he couldn't defend himself. And he heard a voice in his head that said, "Pray." And he thought, "Pray?" And it said it again, "Pray." And he thought, "But I don't know how. I'm an atheist." And he didn't know any prayers. And he started reciting Shakespeare. And then he recited a TV ad he'd seen. But then he remembered the Lord's Prayer and he started saying that. And the people around him got really angry and were telling him to stop. But he also noticed they were all backing off. So he kept saying this prayer over and over. and this pin spot of light appeared above in the distance, and it came down, and these arms lifted him up away from there, and they went into the light. And so that's how he got out of space. But before the near-death experience, he was what he called an aggressive atheist. Straight afterwards, he was a Christian. He said that was it. I gave up my job as a professor. I went to seminary, and now he's a pastor, and he's got a church. And there was a woman, she was dead for a short amount of time, but she said she spent 2 years in hell with all these demons and all these things happening. And there were a couple of little verifications there as well of things that she saw. But she said that she was with this group of people and the demons were pushing them along, and it was like 3 feet of snow and they had to fight their way through it. And they got into this cabin. And she said to the demon, "Why are you being so mean to us right now?" And the demon said, "It's Christmas on Earth. We're always meaner when it's Christmas on Earth." And she started singing a Christmas carol. And the demons, again, they told her to stop, but she noticed they were backing away from her as she was singing. And so all the other people there started singing this Christmas carol, and then they were all lifted up out of that awful space into the light. So that's interesting. And that's in my notebook. That's like, if I ever have a nasty near-death experience, I'll remember to start praying or singing something.
Start memorizing some prayers just in case. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I wonder why this people had those experiences. What were they to?
Yeah, I know. Because with Howard Storm, he was like an aggressive atheist, and he came out of it completely changed. The woman that was in hell, she didn't seem, I mean, she was really nice when I talked to her, but I think beforehand she was probably a nice person. She seemed like she'd be a great mum and, really caring and looking after people around her. So I'm not sure why she would have that experience. But yeah, she came back with a mission to tell people about this, to help them understand something about the afterlife that she experienced. And she's a great guest for podcasts. She's been on a
Oh,
lot of podcasts.
I'll have to reach out to her then. Yes. And this is something I feel like many of the near death experiencers that I've met and talked to and read about come out of it with this mission. Eben Alexander, he tried going back to neurosurgery for a while and then said, no, what I really need to do is I need to tell everybody about the afterlife. So far as recreating music that he had heard there in his NDE, David Ditchfield felt compelled to paint the beings that he saw in his NDE and recreate the music that he'd heard. So, these folks come out of it with this mission that they feel so driven to talk about that. Have you found that with the people you've talked to as well?
Yeah, it's almost like you have people who are very strong Christians and they want to spread the word of the Bible and they get very strong about that. It's almost like near-death experiences come back with that kind of drive and that desire to spread the word of what they've experienced. So get it out to people and try and put it across that material things aren't important. It's that thing of community and after people and this thing of love.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if the people who have these near-death experiences are the type who will go and talk about it rather than someone who would be shying away from the spotlight or not wanting to share the experience, but maybe people who would share the experience and let us know about this. So I don't know. Where can we find your podcasts?
Oh, I try and get them everywhere. So they're on Apple or they're on Spotify and they're on Amazon and just all sorts of places. Probably, what I always say in my episodes is you can find me on your favorite podcast app.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's so many podcast apps now, but yeah, being everywhere I think is very helpful. And then what about your book? Where can we find your book?
Yeah, the book's on Amazon and it's ebook. So it's on Kindle, it's an audio book and it's paperback. And you can get it in Barnes and Noble and other bookshops as well. They probably won't have it on the shelf. You'd have to order it, or you could order it from their website.
Right, right. On your website, it says Amazon and all good bookshops.
Yeah.
And a bookshop I haven't liked. And you've got a website. Please tell us your website.
That's pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And what you can do is go into my calendar and book a 20-minute consultation call free of charge. And if you're interested in doing a past life regression with me, and I have two parts to a regression when I do it. Is the first part is we see the past life and see what's happening there and see if there's something negative coming through that we can clear. But then the second part is we go into the life between lives, where we would hope to encounter your spirit guide, and we can ask them all sorts of questions about your past lives and your current life. But I can't guarantee the spirit guide will show up. Sometimes they don't. But I thought it was interesting that I did one session. The spirit guide came into this space and said, "I'm not going to talk to you. You're here to work on this lesson, and so I can't help you with it," and just disappeared. So that's maybe why they don't show up sometimes.
That is absolutely fair. And we, having done this work myself, I know that sometimes we just have free will and need to respect that. And we need to learn our lesson and do it on our own. They could help us, but they generally don't, because we need to reach out and ask for help when we really get stuck. But other than that, they let us figure it out on our own. Yeah. Wonderful. So, and people can actually book sessions with you. You do this on Zoom, right?
Yeah, yeah. Since COVID, I've done everything on Zoom.
Yeah.
I've clients all over the planet, and it's fascinating. I never know what accent I'm going to hear when the call starts.
I love that. I know that's so fun. That is so fun. Guest is Simon Bown, past life regression therapist, and also author of Verified Near Death Experiences, and also a podcast host of our Paranormal Afterlife. And yeah, is there anything that we've left out that we haven't talked about that you think is important?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of things that I ask the spirit guides whenever we have contact with them. One is that how can we have a stronger connection to them going forwards in life? I
Yeah.
almost always say meditation. If you meditate, you get a stronger connection. And another thing is I'll ask them, well, just when we're leaving that space, is there anything else you feel we need to know? And they almost always say, we are with you always. You are loved and we're on your side. If you need help, you just need to ask.
Yeah, we do need to ask. They're not going to do it for us. And they do love us so very much. So very much. Well, so much for joining me today, Simon. And I'm always fascinated by this topic. Would love to have you back to talk about further research and further work that you're doing.
Yeah, I'd love to do it. It'd be great.
Don't know what to watch next? Decisions, decisions. Well, we've got some suggestions. You can click this little video here and watch that. It's something that we think you're going to like. If you like the last one, you're going to like that one too. You can also click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then you'll get notifications whenever we have a new video up. Win-win, right?